Now for our next segment on the table, over to you, Mohana.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Sahi. With the World Mental Health Day coming up soon on the 10th of October, we shine a spotlight on the concerns and current issues surrounding mental health. Live with us in the studio tonight is President of the Malaysian Mental Health Association and Director of Impact Lab on Mental Health and Wellbeing at Taylor's University, Professor Dr. Andrew Mohanraj. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you, Mohana.
Now
Good to be on the show.
Thank you. Let's dive straight into the theme of this year's World Mental Health Day. Mental health is a universal human right. Now, as a board member of the World Federation for Mental Health, I think you can give us an insider's perspective of the significance of the theme, how it comes about, and why this theme was chosen this year.
Okay. The World Federation for Mental Health was established in 1948 in the aftermath of the World War II with the purpose of looking into the affairs of persons with psychosocial disorders, but under the bigger umbrella of promoting world peace. So the World Federation for Mental Health has been entrusted to propose the theme for World Mental Health Day every year, and this theme is then proposed, submitted to the United Nations and the WHO, which would then endorse the theme. So we have chosen this theme this year, as you have clearly mentioned that just now, because in many parts of the world, abuses of people with psychosocial disabilities continues to happen. And because of that, the World Federation felt this would be a more appropriate theme this year. And of course, abuses can mean different things. It can be very stark abuses of human rights, but also subtly it can be stigma and discrimination and not having access to appropriate health care. So hence, from the universal perspective, this seemed to be a more appropriate theme for this year.
Okay, Prof, if that's the case, how would we apply that concept of mental health as a universal human right here in Malaysia?
A good question, I must say, because in Malaysia, we know that, there is no stark violations or abuses of human rights of people with mental health abuses, as opposed to several other countries, even in our region. So we don't have all that, but we are still battling with other issues like stigma and discrimination, stigma in the home front, discrimination in the community, in the workplace, in schools, in universities. So all these matters still needs to be dealt with. And in some ways, when you look at it from a human rights perspective, there also has some relevance to this theme. So I think we should look at human rights in mental health from a different perspective, on a scaled up perspective perhaps.
Okay. On that note, I understand that mental health professionals adopt the BioPsychosocial Model when it comes to treating mental health issues. You've mentioned this before. And as the director of the Impact Lab on Mental Health and Wellbeing at Taylor's University, can you perhaps walk us through this? What does it actually mean, so a layman can understand this?
This model, this BioPsychosocial Model, was first introduced about half a century ago. And it still continues to be the basis of our understanding of not just mental conditions, but health as a whole. So in this model, it says that physical conditions or mental health conditions has three main factors. That is the biological factor, the psychological factor, and the social factor. Now, when you look at the biological factor in mental health or mental health conditions, you are talking about the transmitters in the brain structure itself, and the pathology associated with that structure, which may not be complete or may have some damage in that structure.
And chemical imbalances.
Yes. And when you look at the psychological perspective, then you're talking about, the past trauma or difficulties in interacting with one another in the family, how we process fears, and what is our cultural perspective of mental health and the attributes of mental health conditions. That is from the psychological perspective. And from the social perspective, we we also understand that the environment has got a big role to play in the mental health condition, whether it is the environment in the family, in the workplace, financial issues, job insecurity, or any event that had happened place, any loss, bereavement, and things like that, is the social factors.
Would the pandemic come under that?
Absolutely, because, you know, and if we view mental health conditions from that perspective, then obviously the way we address mental health conditions should also have these three components, not just biological, but looking into the environment and the psychological perspectives, and that's how we would tailor the intervention. And in the pandemic, the World Health Organization, issued a scientific brief, stating that in the first year alone, we saw 25% increase in depression and anxiety in the world. These are worldwide figures.
Worldwide.
It's also applicable in Malaysia, and of course, when you look at it, you know, more in depth, we find that social isolation, loneliness, financial insecurity, and things like that were the main causes. Undoubtedly, now, after we have sort of more settled, you know, with the pandemic, things have improved. But there are other factors that continues to linger on.
Correct. I was going to ask you, because we keep talking about post-pandemic recovery, and the focus is always on the economic, the financial aspect. But what about
the mental health
state? Yes.
You know, that has lingered on when you look at, you know, the cases of depression and anxiety. With the, you know, especially when you look at youth mental health, and we know that there was a rise in cases of suicide and self-harm behavior. So that has somehow also, it's taken some time to be resolved, and we still continue to address that, although in a lesser extent. And changes in work culture, from, you know, working from home or hybrid working, and even the change in the terms of reference of certain jobs have changed, making some jobs redundant.
Yes.
So we are still recovering from that. I mean, you know, things have improved, but unfortunately there are still things that we have to address, which has come about as a result of the pandemic. In some ways there was a silver lining to this, I would say, because it was a sort of a wake-up call for us, for governments across the world, to actually realize that you've got to do something about mental health. And doing something about it now means not just addressing the situation at hand, but being prepared for, you know, what happens if there's another pandemic of this nature. How prepared are we to address the situation, and how do we ensure or work towards a resilient community after such a you know, pandemic.
And speaking about resilience and preparation, I've heard you mention before that physical health and mental health are two sides to the same coin. Can you walk us through this? What do you mean by this? Can you elaborate on? Does that mean that if I have physical health, I will have mental health, or I need to have both at the same time? Or if I don't have physical health, does that mean that my mental health will suffer?
Well, you know, not all physical health or, you know, physical conditions can lead to mental health issues. But we know there are certain physical conditions. If you look at chronic pain, chronic cancer, for example, cancer, which is often a chronic journey in one's life upon diagnosis, or cardiovascular diseases, these do have the mental health implications. And if you look at mental health as such, there are many conditions, depression and anxiety, can result in some, you know, in poor sleep, in lack of motivation to do things, poor concentration. And people with pre-existing mental health conditions like chronic psychosis or depression or anxiety also somehow, you know, would not get appropriate physical care as because of their condition, and perhaps they don't get the support necessary. So if you look at persons with chronic psychosocial disorders, you will find that their average lifespan is less than a person without psychosocial disorders. So clearly, mental health has got something to do with physical health.
Yeah.
And conversely, of course, persons with physical conditions can also, as a result of the chronicity of their condition, also result in mental health issues, having poor sleep, poor concentration, depression, and things like that. So they are, very closely related. And as you said rightly, they're, both sides of a coin. And there is no health without mental health, really.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful, actually. I think these are things which are not very, you don't see people talking about it often enough. I
yes,
think.
True.
Often overlooked.
Yeah.
On that note, with the budget 2024 coming up really soon, can you please tell us what kind of support should we expect from the government as a society? And as president of the Malaysian Mental Health Association, do you have a wish list?
Oh, certainly. My wish list is very long, but I will just give you a few points. Well, the last budget, 2023, did see an increase, a boost of about 35 million ringgit or so from the previous budget.
Okay.
And this was largely channeled to the Center of Excellence for Mental Health that we have established in this country. And I think that's really good news. Of course, if you ask me, I would wish for a bigger budget, no doubt, because it still hovers, it's less than 2% of our annual budget, less than 2% of the allocation from the health budget, not the national budget, but from the health budget itself. Ideally, we would expect 5%, but I think realistically we can aim for 3 to 3.5%. That will be something more realistic. And I would also like to urge the government to continue this support, particularly via the Center for Mental Health and Excellence, because this center, among other things that it does, one of its mandate is to bring together NGOs and civil society organizations to be able to do something for mental health, because the government alone cannot do things on its own. It needs the support of all stakeholders. So as far as my wish list is concerned, number one, I've already mentioned, I'm hoping for an increase in the budgetary allocation for mental health. I would like all stakeholders to be brought in together and work in a complementary manner with the government to ensure appropriate services for families as well as persons with psychosocial disabilities.
And on that note, thank you so much, Professor. I really hope your wish list gets fulfilled.
I have a longer wish list, but I will not mention that now.
We'll keep it for another day.
But I do have this for you.
Thank you very much.
This is a green ribbon to commemorate World Mental Health Day. Please wear it on the 10th of October.
I will. Thank you very much. And that wraps up Malaysia Tonight. I'm Mohana Priya with SAHIH Samsudin. Malaysia Madani, Tekad Perpaduan, Penuhi Harapan. Thank you for your company. Good night.